Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of many in our Equal Pay MA Roundtable series. My name is Ariel Ziedrich, and I am an intern for the Office of Economic Empowerment, and I will be introducing our all-star panel today. But first, some quick housekeeping. This year, the Office of Economic Empowerment is hosting a year-long virtual webinar series called the 2021 Equal Pay MA Roundtable Series. Pay days affiliated with different demographic groups, in addition to hosting general conversations regarding how the pandemic has influenced wage gap and the current state of pay inequity. Our calendar event dates will be released soon, but today is the first webinar in our series, and we will be discussing the shecession and the gender pay gap with a focus on its impact on Asian American and Pacific Islander women. Some things to note: that this is a Zoom webinar and it will be recorded. The recording may be uploaded onto a public website for future use. This webinar is also being streamed live on our Facebook and our Twitter. For Zoom attendees, feel free to share our live video from the Facebook page. And also feel free to submit any questions in the chat or by using the Q&A function to submit questions anonymously. Please note, however, the chat is subject to public record laws and is not anonymous. And now I am excited to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Representative Trom Nguyen, Massachusetts State Representative of the 18th Essex District. Representative Nguyen is the first Vietnamese American woman in elected office in the Commonwealth, the first Vietnamese American elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and the first Asian American on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Caucus of Women Legislators. Secondly, we have Tao Ho. Tao is a paralegal and organizing fellow who works with Viet Aid and the Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit, primarily researching the conditions of nail salon workers. Next, we have Bora Chimram. Bora is the Executive Director of Lowell Telemedia Center. She previously served as the Executive Director of the Asian American Commission from 2015 to 2017 and is currently a commissioner on the AAC. Also on our panel today is Lisa Wong. Lisa is the town manager of Winchester and the former mayor of Fitchburg. And moderating today's session will be Diana Huang, the founder and executive director of the Asian American Women's Political Initiative. I would also like to extend a special thank you to our co-hosts, the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women and the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition for their partnership and continued work for women across the Commonwealth. And now, without further ado, I'll let Diana take it away.
Thank you, Ariel. Welcome and thank you to all of you who are joining us. I want to first say a big thank you to the incredible team at the Office of Economic Empowerment, Sam, Shaitia, Ariel, and Eli for organizing and gathering us all together for this important conversation. We're here because yesterday was AAPI Equal Pay Day, which is less of a holiday and more of a marker of literally how far we have to go to achieve equity. Asian American women have to work this far into the year to earn the same pay that white men made in 2020. According to the US Bureau of Labor, the pay gap for AAPI women is on average 80 cents per dollar. But we know our community is diverse and the pay gap ranges across our community. Vietnamese American women make 67 cents on the dollar, and Cambodian American women make 57 cents to the dollar, making them some of the lowest paid workers. And this year's Equal Pay Day is different because the pandemic has caused the first ever shecession. Women, and particularly women of color, are disproportionately bearing the brunt of the crisis. In this pandemic, it's been a combination of women bearing the brunt of childcare responsibilities and the economy being hardest hit in industries where women dominate. 5.4 million women have lost jobs, 1 million more than men. And one of the starkest, infuriating, breathtaking statistics, every single job that was lost in December was held by a woman of color, Black, Latina, and Asian American. And so as someone who myself grew up not really knowing how to talk about money in a family, like many of us that wanted to save face when we were struggling, it's incredibly important that as a community, we have this space, we have a space where we can have these conversations, particularly right now. So I want to again say a big thank you to the team at the Office of Economic Empowerment and for organizing and for gathering this panel of incredible powerhouses, Bora, Tao, Mayor Wong, and Representative Nguyen. So I want to first start by asking each of you, pre-pandemic, your own experiences with money, with negotiating pay, and sort of your personal reflections on API Equal Pay Day. And if I can call up Bora and have her start, please.
Bora,
yeah.
I had a feeling that you would.
We had a pre-Zoom prep, and I was just like, sorry, Bora.
Blown away.
Heads up, you're going first.
Yes, of course. So my own personal, and I can only share from my own personal experience. I've been in nonprofit for the past 20 years. It's not until about 10 years ago that I recognized my value, my own worth, and what I bring to the table, and my skills and my experience. Prior to that, because I wanted the job, I needed the job, I did not negotiate salary. So when I was hired for a position, I simply just accepted. So having that experience and having that knowledge, it's so important and so critical that we recognize women and that we give voice to women and have them value who they are, value their worth, their experiences, and provide them with the tools and resources to A, advocate for themselves, B, negotiate, and how we can have webinars or workshops similar to this on how to do that. And the most important thing, was mentioned, I am a commissioner on the Asian American Commission, and one thing that I have advocated for is that we use our resources well, we use our funding well, and one of the things that I'm proud of, part of I was on the executive committee, was to have our staff increase salary. And this notion, this idea of increasing salary internally, in-house, looking at what we have, comparing it to other nonprofit or another agency, it's so critical that we look internally in our own organizations. How are we paying our women in the organizations? How are we competitive to other organizations? And I think this effort was led by a previous chair, Ms. Vera Dormany Cage, and among the EC, myself included, and we were able to give our staff a little increase. It's one of those things that we are recognizing, and we're working step by step to do that. But I have to go back to, prior to this, I never negotiated for salary because A, I'm a Khmer woman, and statistically, I'm disheartened just to hear what you just said about 50% to the dollar as a Khmer woman. And yeah, I think we need to do better. We need to give voice. We need to advocate. We need to be stronger together and lift each other as women. And that's really critical. And myself now, in the role that I am, I'm gonna do my own internal comparison of the value of the women in my organizations. So yeah.
Or how did you get to the point where you did start negotiating salary? What was that journey? Like, what did it take?
Yeah, it was another strong role model, another mentors, really pointing out, have you done that? Do you have the tools for that? And we sat down and we looked at it, and I never did. I just simply accepted it, the status, I accepted it. You know what? It's an opportunity for me to get this job. I'm afraid to say, you know what? No, and then negotiate and lose that opportunity. So yeah, it took someone really pointing it out. Have you done the work? Have you done your own self-evaluation?
That really resonates, Bora. Lisa, can you talk a little bit about your experience? I also know that you know, as a working mom of literally the most adorable baby girl, Selena, in the entire world, can you talk about, on top of that, what it's been like for you, and then what some of the care infrastructure problems are in this pandemic?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of us who are especially working in fields of social and economic empowerment, we do forget about ourselves because we are so much part of this, you know, family and community structure. And I don't want to lose that, but I also think that we need to also, you know, practice using our individual voices, especially when we're in situations where oftentimes we are the only one, and we need to advocate for ourselves when we're so used to a different kind of structure. Growing up, you know, I saw my parents struggle. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a waiter who eventually opened up his own restaurant. But I mean, my mom worked nights, you know, she took care of all of us. We all worked at the restaurant, you know, she did the accounting. And I saw how much of her labor was unpaid. So I do want to make sure that we really acknowledge how much work, not just, you know, paid work, but how much unpaid work is being done by people we love and members of our community, and including ourselves. My first job where I was a top manager, the executive director, was when I was 24. I remember it took me 4 months to negotiate getting that job because the executive director took an early retirement package with the state. And I was the assistant, and I knew that I would have to really advocate strongly to get that job. You know, one thing that happened that, you know, I still reflect on is, I think in order to kind of seal the deal, I ended up basically doing his work and my work for 50 cents on the dollar. So he made $100,000, I made 50, and I did my former job and his former job. I mean, there's a couple things that I think about. One is that it did give me the opportunity to showcase my experiences. I grew that organization almost tenfold in terms of the amount of, you know, construction and redevelopment work we were doing every year. I demanded big pay increases, but even when I left 2.5 years later with work that was nationally recognized, I was still only making, you know, 67 cents on the dollar from what he was making previously. So, you know, it's not something that I recommend that other people do. I think I recognize that there were certain trade-offs to that. And I also recognize that, and again, this is where a lot of us in this, you know, sort of social and economic justice world, we have this trade-off to say, I know I can make a big difference. I know I can open doors here. Certainly came at a personal sacrifice. And that was pretty difficult. I will say that probably the job that I have now, I've been town manager for about 2.5 years, is probably the first time where I've entered a job where I actually make more than my male predecessor, and also being the first female in the job. You know, municipal government is very important. Public service is very important. These are pretty stable jobs, especially during this time. They're good jobs. And sometimes they're hard to get into because they're community by community. And sometimes it's hard to, to diversify in communities where jobs are often, who knows who, or who's been there a long time and who's got connections. So those are things we have to change. I know for town manager jobs, there's over 300 municipal leaders in Massachusetts. 20% are female. I think 1% maybe is women of color, meaning I think there's 2 of us in the entire state. And hopefully that will change. And, but this time, I want to break ground. I want to show that, young women of color can be in these jobs where there historically haven't been especially any Asian representation. And this time around, I want to show that we can make a lot of money doing it. And that's, I will say part of that reason I think is, this is also the first job that I had with Selena, my daughter. And you know, there's so many things I want to pass on to her. There's so many changes I want to make in the world. There's a lot of work that I've done, I think, in the past that have sort of proven that. And now I'm trying to prove other things and things that I think upon and kind of regret a little bit about, you know, some of my lack of negotiating skills or bad deals, you know, that I had on in my career.
Representative, can you share your journey a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. It's really so important for us to continue this dialogue, and listening to my friends and fellow panelists on here. It really has made me reflected on, you know, how I got here in the first place. And I think the two important things for us to remember, and the two things that could really help us in terms of trying to move the needle and making sure that we push on equal pay, is transparency and intentionality. And what I mean by transparency is that the issue, as you're hearing on here, we're first for so many things. And that's a problem in and of itself, because when you're talking about transparency and pay, for instance, right? You know, if you go into a job, you should do the research and figure out, like, what is the range of the pay, and how can you do that if you're really the first to do something? So that's number one. So we need to get more people in there, but we also need to remember that the transparency part needs to be a two-way street. It's like whatever industry it is, need to be transparent about the salary that's available, so that we can compare ourselves to our colleagues. And I think that is the important thing, is that most of us don't even realize how underpaid we are compared to other people. And so in listening to Lisa talk about her, you know, being two of how many in there, it's the same thing in the legislature. We now have 9 women of color, right? And 4 of us are Asian American women. And so we just need to continue to push on that, to know, like, how are other people doing it? How much are they getting paid? And how can we set ourselves up in a way to get there? And what Boris said earlier about just accepting the job, it's like literally the story of my life, because I, you know, coming out of college, and I was the first in my family to attend college and graduate. And then I went to law school and I worked in a nonprofit. And what I actually learned from working in the at Greater Boston Legal Services is the power of unions to be able to help you push for these things. And because there is a union there to push for wage transparency, I came in knowing that anyone else coming in would be getting paid the same thing based on your experience, your background, et cetera. And those are the things that we need to continue to push for, so that there is no disparate impact on certain communities. And the other thing that I was talking about is, in terms of intentionality, is that we need to continue to push for corporations and organizations to set goals. It is not enough for them to just talk about, oh, I want to increase diversity, I want to, you know, recruit more women of color or Asian American women, whatever it may be. What are your goals? How many people are you actually bringing in there? How many people in leadership? What percentage of people in leadership are actually women or people of color? Let us know what your plan is, and we can help you recruit. And some of the other things that I'm thinking about too is that we need to build a better network for recruitment. And I think that that's one of the things that's been lacking, both in you know, the employment world, and also as I've been, obviously, since I'm in an elected position, I've been thinking about politics a lot as well, is that when you're going out there to look for people to fill these particular roles, when, you know, these opportunities come up, where can we go to actually recruit folks? And, you know, I'm very thankful for Diana and her, ALPI and their ability to bring Asian American women into the political world, get that foot in the door so that they can then go on to other opportunities. But we need to be more intentional about setting those organizations up to give those people the first step to get into whatever field and arena that they so desire. And, you know, one of the things I've been pushing for is also involvement in STEM. We know that there are not a lot of Asian American in that field. And so how can we set up grants and scholarships and other opportunities to allow these folks to get into these positions? And so, I mean, I can go on, but it all comes down to, where do we invest the money, right? And for me, I think that with even with, you know, internships, some people get the job because they got the internship, but the internship is unpaid. How many people can actually afford the unpaid internships? So how do we create those opportunities so that people can get paid and get into those positions to have that exposure? And we're talking about relationships, right? And who do you know? What do you know? Rather than what do you know? And so how do we get them in front of the right people so that they can then go on and do what they desire to do? And so I'm going to stop.
And no worries, Representative. We will loop back with you about policy and other changes. But I mean, so Belinda Belinda Liu has a question and I'm just reflecting. She's asking, how did you find out how others are paid, like along this journey? And I know that for me, it's been through word of mouth. It's just being like developing the relationships even within the organization when you end up talking to your coworkers. And it's a little bit scary to be like honest about something like that, but that's how we discovered disparity. So I don't know, Tao, can you speak to that on your journey a little bit and your journey to pay equity or your reflections on this journey?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say like thank you for having me on this panel. And I think just hearing from everyone's stories already, I know that I'm learning a lot from the panelists, especially because in my position right now as a paralegal with VA and with Greater Boston Legal Services, this is actually like my first position out of college. So I don't like really have much experience with negotiations, but I am learning a lot just from like interactions with my coworkers and also interaction with the workers that I am working with, especially because a lot of the women workers that I'm working with right now, they have like no idea what negotiations are. They like, you know, it's very common to just accept what you get and like get as much as you can out of it. Especially with the female nail salon workers that I'm working with, they, you know, the industry is set up so that like workers receive like a commission, right? And so whatever they get is like based on like however many customers they can serve. But I think what we're trying to push folks to learn more about is like learning about their legal rights. Like they should be earning a minimum wage despite the fact that they are working under commission, and also just encouraging folks to think more creatively beyond what already exists. Sure, we know that like the nail salon system is under a commission-based system and depends a lot on like the influx of customers that they receive, but how can we encourage folks to think more about, you know, solutions like co-ops where workers like do have much more ownership in the salon than what they would normally get under just an employee-employer relationship. So I think that, you know, we talk about Equal Pay Day, but not only can we think about how we directly serve like our own needs right now, but how do we also encourage other folks to broaden their perspective of how we can get to equal pay for all Asian American women.
That's amazing. And I will say that reflecting on my own experience, and because, you know, the question is why we all have this experience of just accepting the pay that was given. And obviously we weren't given the tools. I know that the Office of Economic Empowerment actually has some trainings, and that's become a thing that is more available. But Representative Nguyen, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the policy changes too that you were that are happening at the State House and that you're pushing for?
Right. And so one of the questions in there from our Councillor Moon is on, you know, whether there's a bill, and I put the summary in there, but essentially this is a very new bill that I don't remember which of my colleagues filed this, but I was looking at it at 2:30 in the morning this morning to try to explain this bill to you all. But I hope that you would get on this. Essentially, it would require it will allow the employee to ask the employer before employment what the salary range is for that particular position, and also would allow the employee to ask while they're in the job what the potential hires to learn about the pay scale and to figure out opportunities to move up. And I think that is key, is to figure out what do I need to do to get a promotion? Because if you like have these goals and you are able to achieve them, the expectation is you should move up versus someone else who may not look like you, who may look like the standard person, you know, what they consider the standard employee or whatever it may be. why are they getting the job ahead of you if you've met all of these goals and metrics, right? And so I think it's all about making sure that there are expectations on both the employee and the employer side. Going into any position and while you're in those positions to see if it's a good fit, and also give you a sense of like, should I leave this job? If this is a dead end job, you might as well know right off the bat and look for other opportunities. And I keep saying this to folks, and will continue to say this to folks, that there is value in and of diversity itself. So you being there is value to the team. You being there to give voice to those who are often not heard, to give perspectives that may not often be heard. You add that value. And if your employer is not seeing that value, then you should consider other opportunities. And so so this bill is completely new. For those of you who don't know, the legislative session just started in early January. I'm very lucky to be in my second term. So I feel, so, I have the opportunity to continue some of the work from last session, but also take on other priorities like this new bill that just came my way from one of my colleagues to try to push for more transparency. And the other thing too is there's another pending bill that would require employers with 100 or more employees to report average wages by gender, race, ethnicity for the entire organization, and report the proportions at the top earners by race, gender, and ethnicity as well. And as I was talking about, like the whole transparency pieces, you need to know, and also try to help them do a comparative analysis for accountability. And I think it's important for us to continue to push for that. But in terms of other things to help women as well, thinking through politics and how, like, why is it that I'm the very first Vietnamese American woman ever elected into office back in 2018, and it's taken that long? And we just got our first Cambodian American Representative Anna Howard this past session, and I have two other colleagues. But for us, the question is, how do we recruit Asian American women to be in leadership positions or to run for these offices? And how do we support them? So, we were talking about Lisa and her being in that position with kid. It's hard. It's so much harder to do any of these things with children. So we need to provide support. And one of the ways to support women running for office is to allow for our campaign funds to pay for childcare. Currently at the federal level, that is allowed, but not at the state level. And so we should be pushing for that. There's another pending bill for parity on boards. We want to make sure that different boards have diversity and representation, because these are the people who make decisions for the company, different companies. And we want to be able to have a more diverse board to be able to push for these policies with very particular metrics to then allow for more diversity in different segments of our of every industry.
Thank you, Representative. I think just to go back to this, there are, as you said, there are policy things we need to push. There's, inside, outside, right? But there is a self-advocacy piece that I think all of us are reflecting on with a little regret, right? But it's deep, right? Like, even the Asian American Women's Political Initiative, which I founded, amazing, we have an intern with the representative this year, even in recruiting the pipeline, right, of getting low income and immigrant young AAPI women to even apply for an internship. We're one of the only stipended internships in the country for this type of thing. I had to actively go around to colleges, community colleges, like, to recruit one-on-one, in front of people when you could do that, to apply. And there were AAPI women who literally said to me, "I don't feel qualified." And I was like, that's deep, right? Like, these API women don't feel qualified for an internship, right? So I think, as I'm hearing all of you talk, there is something really deep about where I'm wondering where it comes from. And then also, what are the tools that you have found and developed over time to really get to where you are, where you can be empowered enough to make more than your predecessor, Lisa, and more really do the work, and then go in a room really powerfully and negotiate the salary that you deserve? Like, what are the tools that you've developed?
Yeah, Diane, I want to say that I think if you ask people if they're qualified for the internship and you spelled out the duties of the internship, people would say yes. As soon as you say where the place is, then that's where people begin to say no. It's not the qualifications. I think part of what goes deep is the places in which we do not feel like we belong. And I will say, Representative Nguyen, to your point of why did it take so long? When I ran in 2007, there was really no infrastructure. So Emerge still wasn't up and operational. Diane was just getting her group up and operational. There were no women elected. There were no Asian Americans elected in the state house. There was only one other one-term Asian mayor. And that, it was very scattered. And I remember at that time reaching out to organizations that were focusing on getting more women elected to Congress and asking them to help a local candidate, me, and getting a lot of pushback about just that it wasn't their priority. And even some of the pay sites that we use that are pretty standard, those weren't, those really weren't focused on municipal candidates either. I would say that, since that time, all of these things that I've talked about, whether it's Diane's group, it's Emerge, it's all of us sort of mentoring and helping each other, those have really made an enormous difference. It's helped grow the numbers exponentially, even though it's not enough. We need to do more of this. We need to find people who are unapologetically wanting to go into these spaces or who have learned the hard way. We also need to continue to connect with each other. I remember at one of the Emerge events, I was asked to speak, and I actually waved my checkbook and I said, the first person to ask me for money, I'm in front of a room of people who are running for office. The first person to ask me for money, I will max out my donation to you. And the second will get half, and the second, and so on. And I said, until I reach this number. I thought people were going to rush up to me afterwards. No, I had to get off the podium and go hound people. I was like, there's a lot of this that I think goes deep because it's not part of our practice, is not what we see. The more that we can see these things, the more of these networks we have, the more of these kinds of events getting into social media, I think is important. I think it goes such a long way to help people psychologically, as well as adding the advocacy, the policies. I mean, all of these things go together.
Or did you have something to say too? Sorry.
Yeah, I can share my own personal experience. When my current job now as executive director of LTC, when it came up, I had admired the organization for the longest time, and it was established in 1992. That's like almost 30 years. And I'm the first person of color to be in my role. Now, I did not apply for the position. Why? Because I didn't think that I was qualified. Even after running an organization myself previous to that, it's our own self-doubt. It's our own our courage. I didn't have the courage for it. Not until after the date had passed, that the deadline had passed, but then there's that one title until position is filled, I submit my application. And then having support from families and my husband and friends, having other people telling me that you have the ability to do it. Now, how ironic is that? It's innate in us for some reason, because men, if they see job description, they look at it, there's like 10 items. If they have 6 or 7, they would apply for it. Myself, if I don't have 100%, I didn't submit my application. And luckily, I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that I did. I have to say I did. And I'm enjoying my experience and I'm enjoying my work.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I do want to also just talk about, like, we go back to this point about the pandemic and sort of the disproportionate impact that the shecession is having on women of color. And part of that is, right, like it's the pandemic economic crisis has been hitting industries that are dominated by women and women of color, on top of the fact that there's this that women already bear the brunt of childcare responsibilities. So Lisa, I just want to come back to you and just talk a little bit about how, as a working mom, like you feel those burdens, and if you could identify some of the care infrastructure problems that are contributing to
that. I mean, Selena is only 2.5. So let me just say that I put so much love out there and support, and can only hope that I can partially empathize with folks who have kids that are in school or school aged, because you're not only dealing with the logistics of the social and mental health aspects, the academic aspect of it, but there's just you're also dealing with your own kind of emotional needs, right? They're being drained, and you're being asked to give more, and there's really no time. There's really no time to rest. Luckily, I've been able to make choices. Like my husband and I moved down the street from my parents specifically for childcare, and also to kind of be in that pandemic bubble with them. And but I know a lot of people don't have that capacity. So in my work, in the work that I do, a lot of it has been about really just our recreation department here at Winchester, I think is doing a ton more than a lot of other surrounding communities, primarily because we are like pushing, right? Like we are, got a storage container and threw a bunch of furniture and stuff in there so that we could have more space to socially distance programming. And we're actually operating at a loss, which is tough, but we've been able to have a community that's willing to support that. In terms of, thinking about all of the challenges, I was just on a call earlier today with Congresswoman Catherine Clark, and we were talking about domestic violence. And there's going to be the Violence Against Women Act filed again in March, and how important it is to understand all of these, disproportionate factors that are affecting women of color that are not just simply about, economics. And we really want to think about women who don't have a voice, because we all do, and we really want to figure out who doesn't have a voice. Then we need to dig deeper, and we need to really think about how to protect people. We were talking specifically about how there's such a strong correlation between homelessness and domestic violence, that if you really look into the demographics at homeless shelters and you look at their lived experiences, all of these strong correlations, they're actually causations. And we need to address those fundamental things. And we need to make sure that they're not forgotten. I do support that, we, as much as we can, we try to help, give restaurants, for example, a bailout, give them more support, because this is hugely impacting local communities, low-income workers, women in particular. It's also going to help jumpstart local economies by doing that. But at the same time, we know that restaurants, for example, have advocacy groups, they have chambers and restaurant associations. Individual women going through individual tough circumstances don't necessarily have that. So I want to make sure we kind of keep that in mind.
No, absolutely. And I think something that I was thinking about while you're talking too is you also can't have this conversation in this group with the Asian American community without talking about the racism and hate that was coming from the White House, right, around the pandemic, calling it the China virus, right? That really, Asian Americans across the board really experienced racism and discrimination, including violence during this pandemic because of that rhetoric. And even early on in the pandemic, we saw a lot of Asian American restaurants suffering because people were not going because of this rhetoric. So, and it's also affected low-wage workers as a result. So Tao, I don't know if you could speak to some of these pieces and how that's been an effect as part of this shecession.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out because, you know, like you said, restaurant workers in Chinatowns across the nation were experiencing the pandemic, you know, in January, way before like anything shut down. And, you know, I work with nail salon workers in the Vietnamese community, and, you know, workers were talking to me about how, you know, even though winter is usually their slow season, in January, it was much slower than it was. And, you know, the workers I worked with, they didn't necessarily perceive this as anti-Asian bias, but, you know, just the drop in customers that came through their doors was so significant that it's hard to say that it anti-Asian bias didn't really impact it. And, you know, I think also in light of what's been happening in terms of anti-Asian violence recently as well, we know that anti-Asian violence has always existed, but it has like escalated to the forefront of folks' mind as a result of COVID. And I think it just points to the fact that we need to think about our role as consumers, you know, not just in the Vietnamese nail salon worker community, but also in the home health aid community for Chinese folks, in Chinese restaurant workers. You know, you're supporting small businesses, immigrant workers, and whole ethnic enclaves in your role as a consumer. So what power do we have as individual agents in really supporting whole immigrant communities as well? And I'm talking a little bit about like nail salon workers because most of the industry is actually of Vietnamese women. You know, over 50% identify as Vietnamese, especially in Massachusetts. It's like a huge bedrock in the Vietnamese community. And also, I think the national statistic for workers in the nail salon industry are that 75% of them identify as female. So it's predominantly racialized and gendered as well. So, you know, when we're thinking about, you know, whose workers are really in the forefront of our minds and which workers do get to have a voice, I think particularly of nail salon workers because they're low-wage workers who work in such an unstable industry. And what has been happening in the nail salon industry is not just that, like not just that the decrease in business is a result of just the pandemic, but rather it's shown us that the pandemic has revealed flaws in so many of our systems, including like the healthcare system, our wage systems, our social safety nets, and our unemployment benefits programs. So really we need to think about like how it has impacted workers during the pandemic, but we also need to focus on how we can really build up these programs in the future so that even if a crisis strikes down on us again, which it probably will because of climate change, that we have the like security to support not just workers who are already stable, like for many of us, we are working at home, but also for workers who, you know, can't work from home, who are essential workers, who have to work constantly in the salon in order to get their money and financial security.
Thank you for that, Tal. We're gonna open it up to questions. I know we've been trying to juggle the chat box with with the questions that are coming in with sort of the wide-ranging topic that this is. But I know that a lot of you are interested in sort of tools and struggling for yourselves. Like, how do you negotiate for higher pay in relation to your current job is Belinda's other question. Does anyone have any advice for her?
I think I'll take a stab at this. I was thinking about that as I was reading the comments, and I think I want to go back to my earlier point about knowing your own value, since looking at a job description is just not enough because you bring so much more to it. So you just have to remember that and also try to show them exactly what other value. Just going back to Lisa's point, she was doing 2 jobs. Mm-hmm. She should not have been doing 2 jobs without getting paid. So if you find yourself in that position, that is a leverage to say, I am doing XYZ and doing, you know, ABC on top of that. How much is this worth to you? And if you lose me, you're basically losing 2 people. So I would think that it's a reflection. It's both a reflection on yourself as to what you bring to the table and then presenting it, because I think most of us, and actually I should probably just speak for myself, we assume that people know the work that we do. And I found out through the years, that's not the case. You need to make them know. your worth. You need to make them know the things that you do. And even now in my role, I'm spinning my wheels, I'm working 8 hours a week. And then I have constituents calling me and say like, why aren't you calling me back right away? I'm like, you think I'm just sitting here doing nothing that I should respond to you right away? And then it clicked to me that people won't know what you're doing unless you're telling them. So we're very more forward in, what we present, like what our office is working on, what I'm personally working on. And I think that is what we should be taking into any industry is self-promotion. I have to say for myself, and I can probably speak to some of the people I know, especially Asian American women, we are not trained to self-promote. And so that is a skill set that needs to be honed down for a lot of us. It's uncomfortable. Most of us are very uncomfortable. And I was able to develop that skill because I decided to run for office. And really that's the whole thing, is to promote yourself. But you don't need to run for office to do that. You can just work with others, turn to others who've done this, and bounce ideas off of them. I know that when I first decided to run, I bounced ideas off of Lisa, and I called Diana too, just to say like, tell me what you experienced. Let's talk about this, and how do we work to improve what you went through, because we don't want that to repeat itself. And that level of support, I think, should just, we should be more intentional about it, and maybe even set up some sort of network for mentors, mentees, just other ways to make sure that those who are trying to seek to get into whatever industry, we could point them to people who have been there, done that, and can work with them to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I was just going to add quickly to that. I will say that especially in government jobs, a lot of the salary data is public. So make sure you do that research. And, there's, I think, Glassdoor and other apps that might provide you some sense of what the industry is calling for in your geographic area. But I would say that, certainly talking it over with somebody and, even sort of role playing or gaming it out is very important. And then if you are in a larger organization or you have you have like an ally or a mentor within that organization, there's no fault in sort of reaching out to that individual and seeing if they can help you, either write a letter on your behalf, come in with you. There is, I think, a level of politics that exists in whether you're in the public or private sector, and just being sort of knowledgeable, savvy, and knowing that, gaming it out, reading blog posts, familiarizing yourself with it so it doesn't seem so scary.
Thank you, Lisa. Bora, go ahead.
No, I was just reading the comments someone had just posted, how we match mentors. I think for me, that's how I got my courage, was through mentors, to people who've already in the industries and doing the work, and hearing from them and getting that courage from them. Also, I wanted to go around and point out this whole pandemic, right? So we are innately caregivers. We are caretakers. And when we discuss who should stay home with our children, I have 2 boys who are in high school, who should stay home with our children, we always ask the question, who makes more money? And obviously, a majority of us don't make as much money as our counterpart. So that's why predominantly a lot of the statistic that women are staying home to care for their children, it's because of this vicious cycles. We're not making enough money. And then of course, at the end of the day, you have to make sure that your family is provided for. And luckily, we're in a position that we're able to work from home, but there are so many women out there who do not have that luxury. And then they are forced to be a caregiver for their families, and doing the crazy remote and hybrid and all of that comes along with it. So I just feel like it's a vicious cycle. And how do we figure a way out to do that? One is building infrastructures and holding companies accountable for hiring practices. Are they hiring women of color? Are they hiring people that needs that role, that needs to be in that role? And then the other piece is, Asian American are going to be at a disadvantage, particularly with this whole crazy virus being targeted. We're being targeted, and stemming from the landscape that it has been. How hard is that to be able to even get back into the workforce? So it's so many questions, and I hope that I'm so glad that Representative Chan is on the call today, and so many others that are thinking about ways that we can support our community around that. So yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing is really there's no one solution. It's everything.
No.
Right? You need policy change. You need,
Yeah.
you know, your own individual like friends, right? Like who you trust to talk through it. You need some sort of more, we need to build more kind of like infrastructure of mentor, right? So like and we need tools, right? Like some of the resources that have been posted in the chat box. Yeah. And I think Economic Empowerment Office will send out some afterwards. But I think it's all of that together, as well as, you know, having a friend literally say you're worth it, right? Yes. Like it's part of the journey. So one other question is about kind of back to the low wage worker piece, right? Like we talked about salary, we've talked about negotiating that, but there is this piece about low wage workers are being hurt the hardest in this pandemic. So the question was, how do you uplift an entire industry? But Tao, I don't know if you can talk about both the organizational push that's happening and Representative Nguyen, if you can at some point chime into about some of the legislation or some policy solutions that are possible as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit on that. And I think I'm thinking of this worker story that also ties a little bit into what we were just talking about like having a friend, like actually like justify like that the fact that you do deserve pay. Because I was working with this nail salon worker this past summer, and she was actually having issues with her employer over wage theft issues. So her employer was basically paying her a check that didn't actually match what she made and then taking back the rest in cash. And so she kind of like came to our office and was like, is this legal? But she like only had the courage to actually come to us because her friend was like, you need to talk to someone about this because this isn't right. And this is happening for too long. And so she came to us with all this doubt. And, you know, part of our role as like legal advocates at the Asian Outreach Unit is really to, you know, think about what fits best in a worker scenario, because, you know, we do work with nail salon workers, but we don't just want to like go into the community, be like, this is what we think is right. Like, here's how we can rectify the situation. We really want to like assess what is going on with that particular worker and what they want to do in terms of their case. So what we did here was we basically informed her rights, and we're like, no, like this is not right. And like, you have the right to actually demand for the employer to pay you what you actually earned. That way you can actually get the unemployment benefits that you deserve as well. And, you know, based on that, we allow her to make the decision of whether she wants us to be more involved or whether she wants to advocate for herself. So in this case, she decided that, you know, she had a semi-good relationship with the employer besides this one issue. So she wanted to work things out with the employer, especially because the employer was also a Vietnamese person and was part of her community, or what she considers to be part of her community. And, you know, I think it just really exemplifies how we can use the different tools that we have, because we have like folks in politics, folks in community organizations, folks in legal services with so many different roles. But how can we actually use these roles to amplify workers' voices and also trust that workers know what is best for them, despite the fact that, you know, we might think sometimes that we have like a quote unquote expertise. At the end of the day, workers know what is best for them. And, you know, I think it's so interesting to like think about how we can amplify an industry as a whole, because it seems like so large, right? But even just like telling stories like these, and also understanding, you know, what community work does go into that, because this worker isn't just like someone who is a stranger to us. She's like a community member to us, because she also like accesses food services that VA has been like on the ground providing for folks. You know, during the pandemic, VA has been like a key site for addressing food insecurity in the Vietnamese community. And they serve, I think, over 1,000 meals just in 1 week. And so that's like an amazing number to even think about. But also like the fact that this community member is also a nail salon worker, and how can we plug her into the work that we're doing, while also trusting that she is on her own journey to thinking about, you know, what does equal pay mean for her, and how can she incorporate that into her own life. So there's like this larger scope of like, you know, the large direct services work that we're doing and movement building that we're hoping to work with nail salon workers, in addition to like the individual like advocacy component where we're working with folks on their own like path towards thinking about equal pay.
And Representative Nguyen, I'll give you the final word on this. I'm so sorry. There's so many questions. There's no time, but what are the legislative advocacy policy pushes or solutions that can help change this inequity?
I'm glad we're talking about this. And so as we've heard throughout this conversation, I feel like the two themes is that Asian American women, from particular ethnic groups, seem to be segregated into certain occupations, right? And so when we're talking about how they're disproportionately employed in hard-hit retail, leisure, and hospitality sectors, that's why they're disproportionately impacted. And they're also more likely to be working and having to in jobs where they have to be in the front lines, that they have to choose between losing their income and risking their health. And so when we're talking about the issues that COVID-19 has exacerbated, many of these issues that have been existing, we need to talk about a response. And so for me, I have, again, I'm sure many of you know this, and that the governor and his COVID team determined the vaccine rollout with very to no input from the legislature. So our jobs as legislators have been to communicate these concerns to the administration to say, why aren't you prioritizing the people who are on the front lines? Why aren't you prioritizing teachers, support staff, childcare workers, these people who are mostly women, and a lot of them are women of color? We need to make sure that we are vaccinated, giving them access to vaccinations, particularly in places with high proportions of low-income minority folks. And so that's what we've been pushing for, to make sure that they have that access. And also once they're vaccinated, then they can go back to school, which means that these workers they can send their children to schools and childcare centers to then release and reduce that burden, because we know that most women actually more Asian American women live in multi-generational homes than other racial and ethnic groups. And so not only are women taking care of their young ones, they're also taking care of older folks in their homes. So what sort of resources can we put in to not only take care of the children, but also providing resources to seniors, to the folks that they have to take care of? And so those are two policies that I've been advocating for. And also I want to for us to focus on educating folks and encouraging folks to take the vaccines, because I know that in communities of color, especially Asian American communities, there's a strong historical reason for mistrust of government, mistrust of medical establishment, et cetera. So we have to make sure that all the materials out there have to be in Asian languages so that people understand it. It's not enough to just have the resources out there. People need to understand what information is coming out from our government. And for long-term types of policies, and this is not going to end with the pandemic or even after the pandemic, because these issues are long existing. We have to have affordable childcare. We have to have affordable healthcare. We need to talk about mental health. And I remember what Lisa was saying about thinking outside just the economics, about all the other factors that prohibit women, including violence against women and mental health, and how that weighs on a person. I mean, that all affects our economics in the long run. We know people who lose their jobs because they're victims or survivors of domestic violence, or mental health has really prohibited them from participating in the workforce. And so there's also a bill, and I don't remember the bill number, and I can follow up with you all, but there is a bill to allow for sick days to include mental health sick day, not just physical health. Like, I shouldn't be bleeding for me to take a day off. Like, what if I'm just immobilized because I can't take it anymore? I should be able to take that time off too. And I think there needs to be parity between physical and mental health. And so I think we're going to end there. Unfortunately, I have to jump off because we have a Democratic caucus at 12 o'clock that I need to go and figure out what I'm voting on for today. So thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Happy to follow up with any of you with any of the bills that I mentioned, and really want to continue this relationship and partnership with you all as we work to move Asian American women forward. And so really appreciate this opportunity. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Representative. And thank you to all the panelists. I'm gonna kick it back to Ariel for some closing activities.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. All attendees will be receiving a follow-up email that will include resources that we discussed today, and also be sure to check out EqualPayMA.com to learn more about equal pay in Massachusetts and all of our educational opportunities. Before you go, please be sure to fill out our exit poll. We greatly appreciate your feedback as it helps us further develop our programming, and we look forward to seeing you all on March 24th. Thank you again.